I suppose it was 37 years ago, this year. A French guide, Canadian French, was found in the Rockies, lying, his feet bare, and curiously cut about under a high black cliff. He was wearing his equipment, but no backpack, no helmet. He hadn't had a fall. It looked like he had run out, the newspaper said, into the dark. But why without any shoes on that rocky land? They said it was one of the great mysteries of the mountains. I suppose it was. But not to me. You see, I knew the man. He was my guide. Mr. Depot. Back in those days, I was just finishing off a degree in anthropology. And I wanted to make my special study the mountains and the people who live in them. I had an idea back in those days that you'd get tales and customs and creatures all along the rocky, hard mountains, for the mountaineers who lived in them would have an affinity from the north of America to the south. And so I collected legends. And Mr. Dupont, who had been an explorer, an anthropologist, but most of all a mythologist, he was my guide. We started in the south, and he was a font of knowledge, of wisdom as we travelled through the Andes, of all the creatures that could be there, lost in the mountains. Perhaps he was the first person, him and his fate, that turned my mind to what might be alongside what is. Now, when we came up into Canada at long last, after a journey of 2 months, I was going to spend the entire 3-month summer vacation on the trip. He was into his home element, and he hooked us up with some other hunters. Now, they were actual hunters, Simmons and Jean, they were called. They were after, they said, in the wood, wolves, but deer, and anything they could bag. Not my cup of tea. But if you are going into the wild, it is as well to go in large numbers, and it defrays the expense. So we left, canoeing deep and hard into the Canadian Rockies, and all the way, Dupont would say, "Now you know what the animal is here. It is the wind walker, the Wendigo, who rides upon the storm winds, who you know is coming when dry lightning is followed by snow, followed by wind, who walks in fear, who gathers those they gather up into the high fiery airs as their feet melt, who once it hunts always finds its prey, for it devours outwardly from within, turning men into beasts, in a way only the wilderness can." And he would say it again and again. It's not much of a story, we would say. But Simmons would say, "Don't worry, he had got his elephant gun." And Jean would just snigger and mention the things he had shot with his high-velocity rifle. Well, we left them at a base camp. They were going to hike into the high mountains, they said, and go and hunt ibexes there in the wood, there in the high mountains. While we were going to go along the base and see what tribes we could find and talk to them of what creatures they might have seen. Dupont understood all the dialects along the Pacific, bored of the high mountains, but also here, facing the prairie, he understood enough. Well, we gathered tales, and it was right. They often talked of the creature that walks at night, and warned us not to go further, for further we'd go into its land. But Dupont was keen to go further. He said he didn't really believe in the Wendigo, not in the end. Others maybe, but not this one. He had always assumed that up there, in the dry, hard mountains, there dwelt a race, perhaps Neanderthal, who were the basis of the legend. He was a great reductionist. He liked to find other species of humans. So we went. Now, as we climbed, I remember hearing afar thunder. It surprised me, for earlier in the morning there had been snow. We were camped that night on a wide ledge, so wide that there were pines around. But it was on the side of the rocky slopes. I suppose we were about 3,000 meters, high. High enough for it to be cold, even in summer, although it was August by now. I remember I lit the gas and we listened outside. There seemed to be a high wind, but it was strange. Every time I went out, nothing stirred. Dupont seemed to be preoccupied. He would complain about the wind disturbing the flame, as if he wished to believe it. But nothing moved the flame. Nothing. Well, I turned in at about 11. He was going to write a few more things, he said, and then go to his own tent. Perhaps around 12. I woke up. It was 12:30. There was a commotion outside. It was Dupont muttering to himself. I went out. He was clutching a crucifix and saying, the wind is high. The wind is high, the fire is nigh. Oh, how will my feet ride the wind? And I listened, and there was no wind. But I got him into his tent, and I was just calming him down. I thought he must have been under the whiskey. When it seemed to both of us, we heard the voice of Simmons outside saying, come quickly, I need you. And Dupont ran out. I went 5 minutes later, needing to put my own boots on. It was a cold night. But he had run out without any shoes. And there was nobody there. Nobody at all. I called and called again. But beyond the faintest cry back, like an echo, that might have been my voice, or might have been a far-off wail, bouncing off the cliffs. There was no sound, only the whisper of a wind that never came. Well, I waited. I was awake all night. I broke open the rifle that Simmons had insisted I took. And the next morning, I didn't take a tracker to follow Dupont's bare feet. He went up. I could follow him by mud, and then he went long into the snow line. For the snow lay at about 4,000 meters that time. And once we were in the snow line, I noticed something odd about Dupont's feet. Oh, they were his. They really were. But his nails, each footprint he made forward, seemed to be growing and growing behind him. I also got the impression I was gathering on him. I don't know why, but the footprints seemed fresher than they had when I started the journey, as I turned to midday. It was about midday when I stopped to eat. I looked to the left slightly, and I saw a great footprint, huge. I took it to be a bear. Great clawed footprint, a bit like a human, but not at all like a human. Pads and claws. And it was clearly following Dupont. It stopped when the footprints looked like he'd stopped. It moved when he moved. And both were so fresh you could almost smell them. Well, I hurried on after that, expecting all the time to go over a rise on that horrid long slope and see them. But nothing. Only the great footprints got closer to the smaller, and the smaller turned more and more and more like the greater, until there came a point when the great footprint was just behind the smaller, and the smaller was indistinguishable in all but size from it. Just then, as I saw that, I heard a cry, but not on earth, but in the heavens. Oh, the fierce, fiery heavens! My feet will melt in dancing in flame! It was Dupont's voice. I looked up, but there was nothing. Only the cloud. No one. Only the whisper of the wind that had been with me all that journey, like a memory of a storm. I grew terrified. I ran. I slipped. I tobogganed on my behind down the mountain, going back as fast as I could back to our camp. It took me a day and a night. I told Simmons and Jean what had happened. Well, Jean was all for going off. It was dark by then, but Simmons made us wait until morning. And in morning, he and I trekked up. Jean was to hold the camp, just in case Dupont came back. We climbed back to that lonely place I'd last seen him, and further and around. And on the second night we had made camp. We had just lit the gas when suddenly Simmons gestured. I looked behind me, and there for a moment I saw Dupont, as clear as day, lit by some inner flame, his eyes wild, his teeth fierce, his feet seemed hardly there, all smoke and flame. And as we watched, he took into heaven and was gone, only each time to come back as we fell asleep. Always we could feel him, and there was a smell like rotted flesh, old and cold and long, long dead, and ever the whisper of the wind. Once Simmons shot at him, sure, as he said, that he was not a human, maybe a bear wearing a man's skin, and the bullet must have gone straight through Dupont. But beyond, a gathering in the gale, a blowing as hail came down, driving us even in the dark down the mountains. There seemed to be nothing, no impact upon that body that was surely hit by such so great a bullet. After a night of tumult and torment, in the hailstorm we again slipped and ran as fast as we could down the hill. Coming the next day, towards the end of it, back to our base camp. And there, what we saw, but Jean, pulling out his hair, saying, "They've all gone! They've gone! He came back and they've gone!" And we asked, "What do you mean?" And he pointed. And there was Dupont, sitting by the flame. Now, what had happened to him, I don't know. He had no boots on. His face was vacant, as if he was lost in a dream. His eyes almost going white, as if he might be already dead. Only his breathing left. And ever with him there was a smell, like gathering death. And Jean said as soon as Dupont had come in, and he had turned to make him a cup of tea, all the guides had gone, vanishing, saying they would prefer poverty and starvation to that walked at night. Well, we stayed with Dupont. We couldn't move him. Would you believe it, for 3 days we nursed him. He would eat a little at first, and drink much for a while, but say nothing. Always his eyes just looked out, always with the same muzziness. We could not get them to clear. Towards the second night it was clear he was dying. His breath became shallow, gasping, lost even. We were sure of it, so we made him as comfortable as we could and went to bed ourselves. The next morning he was gone. Utterly gone. Well, Simmons said, "Enough is enough," and he insisted that we went back to the nearest town and reported it. And they sent out inquiries and teams, and they found the body, as I described it. Dead a week, they thought, at the base of a cliff. A week, Simmons said, a week. But he was with us 3 days ago. And then Jean said it. "Did you say you saw bears? There are no bears in this mountain, to leave their footfall or no." And I snorted. And I took down the book I knew that Dupont had been reading. It opened naturally at the Wendigo, the creature of wild fire and wind, who stalks a man like a bear and devours him outwardly from within. I have never gone back to the Rockies, or even to Canada. I wrote my piece and was done. But it gave me a belief that it is a duty of a man to look for more than he knows, if nothing else, to serve as a warning for the rest.